On today's show, we joined by my friend Glen Willis of Peachtree Hoops to talk about what became a very, very good win for the Atlanta Hawks on Saturday evening, toppling the Brooklyn Nets behind Trae Young and a deep performance from the offense. But every single player on the Hawks roster that appeared in the game had at least 5 points. The bench was very, very good in this one, and Brooklyn's guard play was a disaster, which helped the Hawks in a big way. A landmark win for the Hawks in their 5th game in a row in the win column, 10-3 in the last 13 games, peaking at the right time, perhaps, for this Hawks team. We'll have plenty to get to on this podcast about this game and the future with Glen Willis coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1210 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Sunday afternoon. And by the way, we are now a part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, a newly launched channel and group of network and shows in the Atlanta area. Check that all out as well on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Today's podcast is brought to you by BetOnline, where you can find more odds, props, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. And I say all of that before I bring in my co-host on this podcast, friend of the podcast, someone who keeps a close eye on the Hawks at all times, Glen Willis of Peachtree Hoops. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good, Brad. How are you doing today?
I'm living the dream. If people are watching this on YouTube, you will see that I am in a very anonymous hotel room here in New Orleans, fresh back from the Caesar Superdome practices and press conferences and all of that fun stuff, which is why the podcast is a little bit delayed, and Glen is graciously helping me out to bridge the gap between what was a pretty big win for the Hawks on Saturday evening, sort of end of the weekend. And then, of course, I had forgotten this actually until you pointed out to me offline that the entire NBA takes the day off on Monday. So kind of a reset because of the NCAA tournament on Monday evening. So at least I won't have to watch two games at once on Monday, I suppose.
And there are like a million games today
Yes.
to work around the Monday date, I think.
Yeah, of course there are, but ironically, the Hawks, of course, don't play today, and neither do the Hornets or the Nets. So the three teams that are like closest do not play this evening. The Raptors do play, the Cavs do play. So there are some considerations for the Hawks, but the three teams that we've been following the closest recently, at least on this podcast, are not in action. So there's a little bit of a window here. And, we can get into a lot of different stuff on this podcast, but I guess I'll just start here. What was your overarching thought about the game on Saturday? Because clearly that was arguably their best win of the season in terms of just overall impact. I'm not sure it was their best performance overall, but certainly a game that they needed to win in the standings for the chase and sort of a high-profile one, especially when you factor in Kevin Durant going for like 100 points.
Yeah, I thought it was an impressive win. And as I have hopefully kind of learned to watch this team, I think most of us have kind of given up on the perimeter defense, the point of attack defense kind of being what we all hope it would be. And I'm sure what they hope it would be too and such. And so I think the key for this team really is to be resilient and to try to persevere through portions of the game where things aren't going the way that they would like, where things aren't going to kind of the blueprint maybe that a lot of us had in mind for this team at the beginning of the year, where we might had hoped that they would find a way to take a step forward in that kind of point of attack defense. So I think about, when this team was younger, less experienced, and I even think about times when they were more, if I can use the word fragile, earlier in this season than maybe they are right now. Seeing a guy like Durant go for 55, having a 5-minute, 7-second stretch down the in the middle of the fourth quarter and toward the final minutes where they don't score. But all of their second efforts, third efforts on defense, their connectivity on defense, they just kind of stayed invested in those areas where you really do have full control of how you show up in those areas. And that's really what kept them, in under control and in shape to kind of be able to kind of put that game away at the end. That was, to me, what we didn't see consistently at all earlier in the season, was kind of not losing your focus on those kind of fundamental areas of play. And, that game outcome was kind of, almost manufactured for ESPN to cover. KD has 55, the Nets lose, on and on and on. But really what it came down to for me was the Hawks staying invested in those areas of fundamental play that helped them kind of work through KD just continuing to make shots, and them having their own scoring drought there at kind of the worst time, and then keeping their footing and getting that win. So to me, when it comes to winning big games, winning games that might earlier this year have been harder to kind of get that win, that's what this team looks like when they're winning games like this to me. So I'm fairly encouraged by it.
Yeah, I agree. And there was a lot of, let's just say, weirdness in the game. Like, there was some normal stuff as well. Like, Trey closing it out is not a huge surprise. Trey having 36 and 10, like, it's a pretty normal game for him, which is kind of crazy about how good he is, that's a normal game for him to have 36 and 10 with some closeout moments. But, the starters weren't particularly awesome. Like, they were all in the negative plus minus. It was really the bench that carried them at times. They had a huge bench advantage in this game, which, of course, has been a point of contention for a long time with this Hawks team. Is that the bench has not always been fantastic. I think it was like 46 to 12 in bench points, something like that, in this game. And I thought it was noteworthy that all 10 guys had at least 5 points for the Hawks. Herter was their least scorer. He was 2 of 10 from the floor. I actually thought he played pretty well, just didn't shoot it very well in my mind. But guys like Gallo, and then you get, had the DeLon renaissance for that few minutes, and Bogey didn't have a great game either. Like, for them to win with Herter and Bogey going, I believe it was 5 of 19 from the floor. It's hard for the Hawks to win when those two guys do that combined sometimes. Particularly when the offense just wasn't like perfect on this night. But I guess I'll start here too, because this became the national. Aside from the Durant explosion, the national stuff I saw was about the free throw disparity. The Hawks taking 49 free throws, which was their season high by a lot. They took 30 free throws in the first half, which I believe was a season high as well in any half. And credit to Durant after the game, he acknowledged this. Like, it wasn't like they were blaming the officiating. Even the Nets were not saying it was an officiating problem. It was because they actually were fouling. If you watched the game, and I know you did, if you didn't watch the game, you just see that, like, whoa, 49 to 19 in free throws. Like, what the heck happened here? Because the Hawks aren't a huge free throw team outside of Trey. But that was noteworthy to me, like, both for the Hawks being able to generate, take advantage of those, and also for the Nets. Like, they just couldn't stop fouling. It was kind of crazy.
Yeah, and I wrote the follow for Peachtree Hoops last night, and when I went back and rewatched portions of the game, and one of the goals being specifically kind of hone in on, like, how did all those free throws come to be, making sure that what I saw live, was the kind of the correct takeaway, and it was like the Nets just could not keep ball handlers in front of them. I mean, that was like, to my mind, like 98% of the issues with fouls is they couldn't contain the ball. It's kind of funny to watch that be such a bad area in a Hawks game and have that not be the Hawks. But
right.
They just couldn't keep ball handlers in front and would have to foul to really prevent kind of free runs at the basket or short range shots and things like that, or eventually to kind of try to keep a Hawks ball handler from turning the corner. And it's even kind of more humorous because the Hawks don't have a ton of guys that are kind of famous for you'd be able to just kind of work past, any defender that they might see. But in the first half, the Nets loaded up on Trey and showed a lot of bodies, trying to not show him any seams. And the Hawks did a good job of, in the first quarter, especially, like, Hunter was good at trying to kind of, from the weak side, get into the seam that was created by them overloading towards Trey. And then from there, it just kind of got worse. I felt like they could have maybe got more free throws in the second half, but if you put up 30 free throw attempts in the first half, it's almost impossible for the officials to not kind of react and think, okay, maybe we overdid that. It's a natural human kind of factor there. But yeah, I mean, I give credit to the Nets too. They didn't complain at all, and I thought it was appropriate that they said this was on us. This was poor defensive discipline and technique. And and I looked it up last night. 49 is the most the team has taken this year. There's one other game where a team took 49 free throw attempts, and I think I looked at the Hawks, and I think all the way back to 2002 game when they had more than 49. So 20 years since they've had this volume, if my query was put together correctly there. So I mean, it's pretty wild. And I think KD even said after the game that the field goal percentages were reflective of good defense in terms of contesting field goal attempts. I always think field goal percentages skewed when a team gets a lot of free throws because it doesn't kind of factor in what would have been potentially really high percentage shots, right at the rim. So it's a little bit misleading, but that was wild in that area for sure. I even remember looking down at my phone and in the first half. It's like, it feels like they shot 16 or 18. And I'm like, oh my God, they're already at 26, in the first half. And it wasn't, I think when they had 24, I think Trey only took like 2 of the first 24 or something like that. So it was truly a problem with across the board. It wasn't just Trey kind of doing what he could do sometimes.
Yeah, the first half box score was pretty insane because, you cover up the free throw number, which you can't do, but taking 30 of those, and they also only had 2 turnovers in the first half. So you turn the ball over twice and have 30 free throw attempts in a half. Like, there's only so much you can do to mess that up. Like, they're up 15 points at the half. Like, those 2 factors alone, like, you're just in the driver's seat the entire game. And it's pretty crazy because if I had told you that the Hawks were going to have only 18 assists and they were going to shoot 32% from 3, and the Nets were going to shoot 46% from 3. Like, the Hawks don't win that game very often. If that's all you know, the Hawks don't win very often. And they won this game not super comfortably, but certainly, like, it wasn't like in doubt in the final seconds. I mean, it got closer than it probably should have late in the game. But man, just obviously the free throw attempts, but also this is the thing about the Hawks all season long, as you well know. Ball security helps. Like, if you turn the ball over 7 times a game, which they did last night, and they're number 1 in the league still in turnovers, that's a huge thing. It covers up for a lot when you don't make it easy on the other team. And the Hawks had more steals last night than the Nets had turnovers overall, and turnovers created overall. And like, that's the live ball stuff really helps you. And they just kind of won on the margins. Like, and it's kind of crazy when you're playing the Nets and how high powered they are. And I'm going to ask about the defense in a second as well. But like, just sort of neutralizing that and just doing the little things, as the Hawks are not always great at doing, but they did it last night for sure.
Yeah, they did. And it's partly, I guess, satisfying to see as a person watching the Hawks, and frustrating because every time you see this, you're like, oh, why couldn't this have been visible in January or December or whatever point you want to kind of go back to?
Any point of the season would have been
right.
good, yeah.
Right. Because I've said multiple times on Twitter across the season that they look like a team that tries to figure out in the first quarter and a half exactly how much defense they have to play to win the game, and they play not an ounce more than that. And I think that's a fair kind of characteristic of the way most of the season has gone. They started to break away from that, I think, some, and maybe now to a decent amount, because they showed a lot of effort the whole game last night. And hopefully that's something, for their sake, that they're kind of figuring out how to play with that intensity. Gallo mentioned after the game that, hey, we're playing well. They've won 10 of 13, but he said we still have to improve. And when he was asked, where, and he said playing with intensity. I think the Nets got out to like a 10-2 start in this game. And some of that was just random shot making and things like that. But it's still, in his mind, kind of reflected the fact that they don't always kind of start games with the full kind of intensity and energy. I think that they hope they're getting closer to that. But at least last night, and more so of recent, they're showing more consistent effort and attention to the more nuanced and detailed areas of the game. And for Hawks fans and for them, I'm sure that there's a hope that that's going to help them as they move toward what's looks sure to be a kind of play-in scenario.
Yeah, there have been lots of buzzwords. Consistency has been a huge word this year: intensity, execution, et cetera. And we can touch on all that stuff in a second. I want to ask about the defense as well. Before we get to all of that, though, a word from our sponsors on the podcast today. I'm really trying to eat right this year. I'm having a lot of success with that because of Built Bar. In some ways, it's actually a lot easier for me because I actually enjoy eating Built Bar. For the protein-infused puff bars, they're fantastic. All the other fan favorites from Built Bar. Each and every bar has 100% real chocolate on the outside, which makes a huge difference, and they taste great. On top of the taste, Built Bars have low calorie and high protein, and you can actually replace your candy bars with Built Bars both in taste and to improve your overall nutrition. Built.com has all the answers and nutrition information that you possibly could want, and we're blown away by it because most Built Bars only have 4 grams of sugar, 4 net carbs, and 17 grams of protein with a very low calorie count. Built Bar has longtime flavors like coconut almond and some of my personal favorites beyond that, and also new flavors coming all the time. Plus, each and every flavor is absolutely delicious. The best way to find out about all the stuff from Built Bar is go to Built.com. Yes, that is Built.com. Use the promo code LOCK15 when you get there. If you do that, 15% off on your order with Built Bar. That's 15% off at Built.com if you use the promo code LOCK15. One more time, 15% off at Built.com. All right, Glenn. The defense was kind of interesting in this one. Obviously, the Nets are very explosive on offense, and Kevin Durant, 55 points, speaks for itself, and he was extremely efficient too, as crazy as that is. Like, he was unbelievable. We all kind of watched that. I want to start with him. We'll get into the backcourt stuff because I made lots of comments about how bad I thought the Nets guards were in this game. But KD doing what he did, how much of that is just KD being ridiculous, which certainly is part of it, unquestionably. But how much of that is on the Hawks? And there was lots of discussion about how they were defending him. Hunter had some foul trouble early in the game. They went to TLC, and as I kind of talked about a little bit, I know you did too. They don't have a lot of great options. It's something we talked about for a long time against these big wings, and obviously Durant is perhaps the number one threat in this realm in the entire league. But outside of Hunter, they don't really have great options, and that was sort of a reminder in this game to some level.
Yeah, it was interesting to watch because even on my rewatch when I went back, so many of his shots were contested, and as he just alluded, his pull up is basically I don't think anyone else has this pull up game right now in terms of just the makeability, how clean and repeatable it is, what the percentage he makes, but also just the release point that no one can get to. He has that, the handle and the step back, and he knows how to get separation and the high release point. So I don't really know how you do much if he's just shooting over the strongest contest you can present. If they go in, they go in. And I thought that was probably 80% of the explanation for what KD's outcome was last night. And to kind of point at some of the maturity the Hawks showed, they just like, okay, we're going to try to limit everybody else, And they did. They worked really hard rebounding. They were often 3 to 4 bodies in the paint helping rebound and things like that. So, I thought that was kind of a mature aspect. But, I didn't see anything that was what I would call even a remotely significant flaw in how they were defending him. They eventually did make an adjustment and were throwing 2 bodies at him almost the entire second half. And then the Nets kind of countered the counter by having him get the ball up and get it back and making it a little harder for them to kind of keep 2 bodies on him. So that was an interesting part of the game to watch in terms of how the Hawks tried to kind of adjust there and how the Nets kind of countered that back. But I thought Hunter was fine. I thought some of the fouls called early were, marginal, I would say, but he's Kevin Durant. He's one of the greatest scorers ever. He's going to get, gray area calls consistently as any player of his stature is going to get. So I thought the defense was good, overall. I just thought he was just, as he can be, a ridiculous shot maker. I guess I was a little surprised that he had never put up 55 before. It just seems like, how long his career has been and such, but career high on an incredibly efficient night, and so many shots were with a hand in his face. What do you do?
Yeah, I agree. I think you use the word mature. I agree with that. Like, I think that it's not typical of this Hawks team this year to stick to what their plan was in the way that they did last night so well. And that sounds crazy because they got 55 points to a guy. But if you go on the numbers overall, aside from 3-point shooting, which again was fueled largely by Durant and a little bit of Kyrie, but they did a really good job across the board defensively. And it's not only about stopping one guy. Like, they kind of just not that they wanted to let KD do that, but they certainly didn't overreact too much. They like you said, there were some funny moments once they made the adjustment, and there were some funny screenshots and angles where you see literally him being doubled off the ball. It's just kind of stuff that you don't usually see. Honestly, stuff that Trae Young gets the treatment of sometimes, and Hawks fans notice that. But they did a really good job on everybody else. I mean, even Kyrie had 31 points, but on 32 shots and no free throws, and he was 5 of 18 on twos. They stayed solid. And, the one thing people were asking me about was why they they had TLC guarding him for a while instead of Hunter. And I thought it was just as simple as they were trying to keep Hunter out of foul trouble. He was already in foul trouble. And that was my observation. Obviously, Nate's not going to get into that specifically, but I don't really make a big deal out of that. And yeah, if you go down the roster, TLC is the next best option behind Hunter of available players. Maybe you could throw DeLon on him, but DeLon is much better against a guy like Kyrie. That was one of the people that people were asking me if they should try DeLon. It's well, DeLon, God bless him, I'm the biggest DeLon fan in the world. He's got 7 inches shorter than Kevin Durant. He's not going to be able to bother KD's jump shot, I don't think. And then maybe they could try a Kongwu, but he doesn't guard perimeter guys like that. Someone threw out the comparison. I wonder what you think about this. Of a Kongwu guarding Giannis. My reaction was, look, KD and Giannis are very, very different. They're kind of the same height in some respects, as crazy as that sounds, because KD's enormous. But all respect to Okongwu, who's going to be a great defender. He already is a really good defender. Having him guard Kevin Durant on the perimeter is not going to be a solution, I don't think, right now.
Yeah, I mean, how many reps has Okongwu had against a guy with that kind of ball skill, right? None. And with Giannis, you don't worry really about the step back. I mean, you try to challenge it if he's in rhythm, and things like that. But statistically speaking, that's a shot that any team's going to kind of live with there. So it's a completely different thing. Giannis is trying to bully his way to the rim 90% of the time. Okongwu is well suited to try to resist, as well as most guys at that position there. And a lot of teams put their center on Giannis. You just don't see that with KD. He's just got way too much. He's too good with angles. He's too has all the kind of the ball handling package that anyone could have, and then the release point, which we talked about earlier. So I didn't view Okongwu as a viable option at all. I thought it was good to see the adjustment to try to kind of double him. But the Nets being a fairly veteran team for the most part, kind of solved for that pretty quickly and got KD back on track in the fourth quarter, and that's what allowed them to get the game all the way down to I think one point. I think it was at one point.
Yeah, it got to 1 in the final 3 minutes or so at one point. Yeah.
Right. So the Nets kind of figured that out and such. But as I wrote in my follow last night, like there's a reason. Even if you look at all the defensive flaws that were really obvious last night with the Nets, nobody really wants to draw them. No one say it's going to finish 1 through 4 and the East wants to draw them because this can happen. And no one really has a solution for KD. And if he goes, kind of white hot for the series, it may not matter how well you play. Brooklyn could still, if not just simply pushing a team all the way to 6 or 7 hard games, say in the first round, win that series. And it's their matchup and a headache that no other team in that range of the standings really can offer. That's not to say that I dismiss everyone else.
No.
But there's 2 Hall of Fame caliber scorers on the Nets roster that are an absolute nightmare and a headache to kind of deal with. And sometimes they just do what they do, regardless of what you do on defense. And I think everyone would want to avoid that.
For sure. And I mean, even this is not an excuse because, of course, the Hawks are without John Collins as well. So it's not like it's a huge lopsided thing. But the Nets being without Seth Curry at the last minute last night, as well as Bruce Brown and Goran Dragic out as well. I'm not sure how much he helps them, but I don't want to overstate it. But I really thought Brooklyn's guards were pretty much as bad as possible. I mean, obviously Kyrie had 7 threes, and that kind of saved him a little bit. But he was 5 of 18 on 2s. Patty Mills is really good at basketball, but he's not making shots. He doesn't help you because defensively he's not going to give you much of anything. And then not to pick on Cam Thomas, but I thought Cam Thomas was the worst player on the floor in pretty much the entire game. So that really gave the Hawks an advantage. Even on a night when Herter and Bogey didn't really have it going, the Hawks still had a lot better guard play than the Nets did because the Nets just didn't have much going on back there.
Yeah, I remember one point tweeting like Nash has to get Cam Thomas off the floor, and I didn't pick this up live at all, but I went back and watched. Blake was actually more harmful. Now he wasn't on the floor as long.
Played less. Yeah, I agreed.
Right, but man, when I rewatched, I was like, man, Blake was.
Oh, they don't
terrible.
play him. Not going on the rabbit hole, but they don't play him much anymore, and I think he's just cooked, to be honest. I mean, Blake's like a fringe Hall of Famer. Like Blake's a great player at one point, obviously, but they kind of taken him out of the rotation at times, and I think we kind of saw why last night. I think he's done, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting to see how they handle the staffing the 4 and the 5 heading into the playoffs. It's like, man, did a guy like Paul Millsap might really help you guys, I
mean, they're already starting Kessler Edwards, who's a rookie, wwho I like, but is still a rookie who they're starting regularly. And then like they need Bruce Brown to be great because he's kind of their only option at a certain point. Yeah, the Nets are. We just talked about how scary they are, and they are, but like they have some very obvious flaws as well. Like
they do, and I mean, I don't know what's going on with Patty Mills' shot making. Maybe he's kind of hitting a wall. I mean, he's been playing a while and he plays with a ton of intensity and energy. One of my favorite guys to watch over the years for sure. But when he's not, you said a few minutes ago, when he's not making shots, it's kind of a whole different kind of calculation to figure out how you kind of set him up to help you and such. So I still think no one wants to draw them because of KD and Kyrie. When you look at what's going on with Cam Thomas right now, and even Kessler Edwards, if you've kind of followed NBA Twitter, you've heard all sorts of kind of bursts of excitement for those guys for different reasons, obviously, across the season. But the Nets are trying to elevate their play as they prepare to head into the postseason, And many, many times, just what you'll see is the young guys like Cam Thomas is not able to kind of give them what they need as they look to elevate their play. And the same is true of Kessler Edwards as well. And that's not a knock on either one of those guys, per se. But when a veteran team, and a team led by two veterans like Katie and Kyrie is trying to raise their level of play, that's when it becomes harder for the young guys to kind of understand, like, oh man, I've been contributing solidly all year long, but now I've got to elevate my play. Young guys naturally have a hard time kind of, immediately kind of responding to that. And that's going to be tricky for how the Nets deal with that. I have no idea what the likelihood is of Ben Simmons playing for this team, heading into the postseason. I presume they're doing everything they can to get Seth healthy, but they really can't afford one of their veterans, supporting players like you mentioned Brown and Seth and Patty. They need those guys playing every game, playing all the minutes that they need those guys to soak up and playing well for them to kind of take a real shot, even if the view is that no one wants to draw them.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to zoom out and ask you some stuff about the rest of the season for the Hawks in a second. But before we get to that big picture look ahead, a word from our sponsors on the podcast. The Masters is coming this week. I know in the Southeast, it's actually a huge deal, with a ton of national interest as well as international interest. I know I absolutely love the Masters as someone who grew up in the state of Georgia. And with that in mind, betonline.net is the number one source for all of your sports betting needs and your sports information this year. From all the latest odds, contests, futures, player props, exotics, and much more. BetOnline is the best spot for all the latest developments of the sports world, including podcasts and reviews for all of the leagues this season. Not just basketball that you hear on this podcast or golf either. They actually have continued source for all the sports wagering information at BetOnline, and also have every possible thing they could possibly imagine, honestly, including live betting and your favorite casino games. BetOnline has the odds on all kinds of sports, from baseball, tennis, auto racing, horse racing, hockey, MMA, boxing, soccer, cricket, entertainment bets, and much more. It's also a great time to look at the futures market, both in baseball. Season's about to start over there, of course, and the NBA, with playoffs approaching in earnest in the very, very near future, with the Hawks participating in the postseason this time around. And the website right now is betonline.net. Head there on your computer and mobile device to learn more about the trends and the action in the sports world. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right, Glenn. Obviously, the Hawks, as we speak on Sunday, April the 3rd, they have a game lead on Brooklyn now after that victory on Saturday, as well as a game lead on Charlotte. They have not been ruled out of getting out of the top into the top 6, but with one result any direction, they are locked into the play-in. So we have to assume right now that the range is 7 to 10 for Atlanta, and 7 is not likely, but certainly possible. If they were to win out or go 3-1, they have a chance to do that. Before we sort of get into the specifics, do you feel like they're playing their best basketball? Because that's been a theme of stuff that I was reading and hearing after the game. And obviously, winning 5 in a row at this point in the season was badly needed, and also certainly is noteworthy. But the schedule has been pretty favorable for a while, which has to be said, at least acknowledged on some level as well. But that does not, they just beat the Nets, so that's a marquee victory. Are they playing their best basketball right now, or something close to it? Because clearly, if they, as we all know, even if you're skeptical of the Hawks on some level, we've seen them reach heights that have been much higher than their season output. So if they're getting close to that again, that could be pretty scary.
Yeah, I think the answer is yes. And and the good news for Hawks fans is it's quite obviously the right time. And I chalk my analysis and that around that up to the fact that the defensive effort intensity is there. They're not kind of letting their effort and intensity be dictated by immediate results. When they have adversity, they're kind of pushing through and sticking with the plan and playing through. They just look like a more veteran, kind of mature team right now. But I still think, as a team, they're going to draw most of their energy, even if it doesn't fluctuate as much, from how things are going on offense. And I think they have pushed past some of the issues they were having maybe a month back or so, where they went through a long stretch where they didn't see an opponent that was using drop coverage, and which really causes them to kind of refactor a lot of the ways that they were generating offense last year. For example, Trey made a million floaters last year and kind of just killed the drop coverage. But I felt like for the latter part of February and going into March and maybe towards mid-March or whenever, that there's way too much one-on-one isolation, burning long stretches of the shot clock, trying to identify the right matchup. And a lot of times that was Trey trying to take a big kind of into space and attack the big, which Trey is capable of doing, but that's still not going to be I think where any team wants to kind of get, their first action or their first kind of effort at something. I think the ball movement's better. I think Trey is realizing when a team is loading up against him that it creates seams for his opponents to attack. I think they're, back to using more kind of intentional weak side action as opposed to just having guys kind of standing on the perimeter. So I think the proactiveness that we see on offense, the less dependency on isolation kind of attack has helped them move past some offensive obstacles. And it's kind of funny to talk about that because I don't think they ever fell below second in offensive rating, but it hurt them in important stretches of games, and it held them back against opponents that they should have had absolutely no problem really kind of solving for. And I think that's where their mojo comes from, is when they're kind of hitting on all cylinders on offense. It sustains their energy, it sustains their intensity, and I think it keeps them feeling more confident about their opportunity to control the game. And like last night, to wrestle control back from the Nets down the stretch, despite a 5-minute, 7-second kind of drought on offense, to me was just indicative that I think the team is more confident in what they're doing on both ends. So that makes me feel like, I'm watching the team do things that they weren't doing at all for some stretches, and then maybe other stretches were doing it consistently. The defensive effort, communication, pushing through adversity, doing what you can, not becoming deflated when KD's going off for 55 or something else like that. And then an offense, not just buying into, okay, we're going to attack the mismatch and that's all we're going to do, and everybody else is going to stand around and watch. They pushed through all of that, and they've kind of broken what I thought were those most problematic patterns of the last, 4 to 6 weeks during the times that they weren't, before they got into kind of this real stretch of success. So to me, I feel like those are the things they have to do to give themselves the best shot to win games now and past the regular season, depending on whatever matchup they end up with. So long answer, but the summarized version, yes.
No, that's one of the long answer. That's good. I think that's I would echo all of that, and that's the more specific stuff. And I'll go broad and just say, like, what they've done in this 10-3 stretch is win the games they're supposed to win. And for the most part this year, that's been a problem. They've not always done that. I mean, with the exception of a home loss to New Orleans in this stretch, which did happen, and they should have won that game probably. But every other time, I mean, the Detroit game was kind of a weird one, but it was like there was a back-to-back, et cetera. They've beaten teams they're supposed to beat. And the flip side of that is that if you go game by game, we won't do that. They really only have 2 games that were like big wins in that stretch. It was that Memphis game without Trey, which is bizarre. They just kind of dominated against the Grizzlies without Trey. It was a strange result. And then last night, every other game, they've been in a favorable position. Like, they were big favorites in, I believe, 8 of the 10 games. Even that Golden State game, which might look tough, is at home against the Stephless Warriors, and that's just not the same team. So you could see what you want to see in this stretch, I think. But I'm kind of with you. They've shown better habits. They've kind of figured some things out. They've been a little bit more steady. They've been a little bit more attentive, and maybe that's just the time of year. There was the whole round of bringing back up the boredom comments earlier in the season, and I think they've kind of gotten rid of that now, at least for now. Knock on wood, if you're a Hawks fan, that they won't go out and lose to Washington at home on Wednesday in a game that they probably need to win. But that's been, for me, the big picture takeaway is like, look, there's just been a little bit less of those just flat out inexplicable performances that they've had way too many of this year. And you can still find them in the recent past, but there have been some taking care of business moments too.
Yeah, and even they should have won that Pistons game, really both of them, if we kind of look at them together. They were about 3 weeks apart, I think, and then that Pelicans game. But the last Pistons matchup and the Pelicans matchup, it's not like the Pistons have been pushing everybody they're playing.
They've been pretty frisky recently for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, maybe a month plus now.
And the Pelicans play a very professional game, and they push everyone too. So,
yeah.
So I think from that vantage point, you can kind of say to yourself, like, don't just look at the record when you look at Detroit. They've been raising their level play across the year. Cade's been becoming more aggressive and more sure, kind of about what he's doing. They've gotten Olynyk back, which makes a massive difference for a young guard to have that veteran big to kind of work with. So again, I don't want to be mistaken as to say those were acceptable losses, if you will, but I just think that maybe the average NBA fan doesn't know how well Detroit has been playing during that stretch and how tough New Orleans has been across the whole season.
Yeah, the Detroit loss as well was a travel back-to-back, and that's just throw out most things. Unless you're playing one of those, Pacers, Blazers, G League quality teams that we've seen recently, or maybe the Thunder that was just horrific. Unless you're playing a team that just has nothing, that's a tough spot for anybody. A road back-to-back that's just tough. So anyway, we've said a lot about that. I do want to ask you one more specific-ish kind of question before we look ahead at the schedule, and that's the John Collins lingering element, because they gave a kind of a non-update on Collins. They were kind of backed into a corner to give an update because they said they would after 2 weeks. And basically what the Hawks said on Friday was that Collins is continuing to progress through his rehab, and his basketball activity will depend. I'm going to read this now. Will be dependent on upcoming follow-up appointments with foot and finger specialists in consultation with the team's medical staff. So I kind of laugh, like that's the most non-update in the history of updates. And I think my guess has been for the last 3 weeks or so, and I've said this a few times, that he won't come back. They won't rule him out. They haven't done that. Maybe he'll play. I could be wrong about this, but that was not an encouraging update. It didn't rule him out either. But I think in my mind, I'm looking at look, the Hawks are going to be what they are without John Collins for the rest of the way. If he plays, that's great. And it's a notable loss. I know they've had to stretch without him where they've had some success, but I'm not going to entertain the better without John Collins stuff. I don't believe in that in any way, shape, or form. But they have sort of adapted to it, and they kind of settled in this groove now where they've been starting TLC as sort of the placeholder. Nate, agree or disagree with him, Nate's big into the keeping guys in roles thing. They like having Bogey and Gallo off the bench. That's the reason why they're doing that. No one believes, including Nate, the TLC is better than Bogey. No one believes that in the world. But it's just interesting to see how they sort of kind of had to figure it out now, and they've had a few weeks, and I wonder what you think of the team quality just generally, because clearly that's a big loss. Collins is arguably a second best player, but they've kind of figured some things out without him, and I think they have to kind of play on that now.
Yeah, I mean, I think they are figuring it out too. I mentioned in the middle of the game last night that I thought Hunter's activity on the defensive glass was as high as I think I've ever seen it.
Thank you for saying that. I forgot, because I've been picking on him for a while about that, and we should definitely point that out, because he was actually quite good on the glass last night, which is a departure, but I'm glad you said it, because I forgot to say that. That was a notable thing, and I kind of poked fun of it because I wasn't there. But
right.
he was actually, I think that was probably his best rebounding game of the entire season in terms of just the numbers and the activity.
Yeah. I looked it up when I was writing last night. The 11's his career high, and he had 10 last night. And not that the stats always tell the full story there, but even just kind of coming down and being another body down there to kind of help. Well, he's, as we all know, he's playing more and more at the floor because JC is out, and that's just critical, especially for any stretches where it's him with a Kongu, which I know Nate tries to stay away from. Nate really does try to pair kind of Gallo, who isn't the strongest rebounder in the world either.
Yeah, Gallo Okongwu doesn't really work either for that, to be honest. Like I've kind of long thought they might try to play Gallo with Capella more, but Nate just doesn't seem to want to do that a ton. So
right. Yeah, agreed. I mean, Gallo does know where to be, and Gallo's played power forward forever, so at least he has kind of the muscle memory to do some of the basic things there. I hope, but it's still kind of tough. But that really is critical to kind of making it all work. Is DeAndre helping rebound the ball, especially on defense. And on the flip side, Hunter has embraced some of the things playing offense at the floor. I've noted that they're running, when they run the kind of the 4-5 staggered, high pick and roll, that traditionally they float the 4 kind of pops, if you will, to the 3-point line, and the 5 goes to the rim. They've inverted that. And DeAndre's been slipping to the rim, and there's some interesting stuff that like Trey and Clint are doing to occupy the opposing team center. So he's even been embracing, some of the kind of nuanced parts of being a guy who is in the pick and roll as the screener and not just kind of floating out to the 3-point line. And so, I know that Hunter has had what most Hawk fans consider to be a disappointing season. It's been real up and down. There's been a lot of bad from him this year, for sure. I don't know how much of that is attributable to just the injury, breaking the continuity, that he might have otherwise had and stuff. But part of the, this stretch working is DeAndre doing increasingly, even if it's been kind of a fairly incremental kind of journey for him, the things that they need him to do when he's playing at the 4, and that's what's helping them have some success with JC out. I don't at all buy that they're a better team without JC. I think that's just absolute crazy talk. And they miss him, and Gallo is really important to what they do on offense, really important to the second unit, as we know. But there are some matchups where, he's really tough fit on defense. And they'll have to kind of figure that out, going forward. But, for me, the absence of JC just kind of makes you realize, like, if I could kind of, for a moment, kind of fast forward to the offseason, I think a lot of people assume Gallo's not going to be on this team next year because he has that, smallish cap hold going into the offseason. But man, if they're going to move up from Gallo, they're going to have to find someone who can shoot at that position to help, because it can't just be JC, especially if they come bring back both Capella and Okongwu at the 5 and don't make a move that results in them having some shooting at the 5 and such. I mean, on one hand, it's like sometimes I'm like, how is Gallo going to help defensively and match up X, Y, or Z? On the other side, it's like, thank goodness he's on the roster, because he gives you so much stretch shooting at the 4 that just gives Trey, so much space to work with. And when you get a guy like Gallo, who's a veteran, who was never, using much athleticism, didn't have much athleticism to work with really ever, that's kind of what you get. But I mean, he's so critical to what they're doing. And, it was funny to watch the second quarter last night again when the Hawks won, almost, doubled up the points that the Nets put up, and they almost couldn't score like the first 3 minutes of the quarter. But Gallo, Bogey, DeLong were playing defense and really kind of, bringing their intensity there. So, hopefully they continue navigating this. Hopefully Gallo's elbow it just kind of gets better and he doesn't have the other issue, because I don't see how they survive any time if DeAndre doesn't keep embracing what is needed from him at the 4, and Gallo's availability, and it kind of brings the things that he can bring is just critical. But they miss JC on defense, I think, more in a lot of ways because of what Gallo brings. But that it's going to take a team effort to kind of cover that loss. And lately they've been, I think, hitting that mark, and hopefully will continue doing that.
For sure. If they can get that Hunter performance channeled from Saturday and replicate it, then that'd be fantastic. I don't think you can bank on that just yet because he just hasn't shown it for that, and especially in the rebounding categories. But
Right.
Obviously they do have Jalen Johnson to maybe plug in long term, but he's a different player from Gallo. I mean, Gallo is a very unique, as you sort of described there. He's a unique guy in that he does have some fit challenges, but he's also still a fantastic offensive player. I mean, just full stop. The way that he has to be guarded, the matchup stuff he can do if you need him to. All that is he's kind of a one of a kind on the roster. So when he's out, as we've seen, I think he missed 3 out of 4 games recently, and they just weren't the same team on offense. They're just not without
Not
him,
at all.
especially without Collins. Like if they don't have either one of those guys, it becomes a real challenge offensively at times as well. So we'll see how they handle that. But I'd love to be proven wrong. If John wakes up tomorrow and can go, that'd be fantastic. I just people keep asking me, like my party line is like I'm assuming he's gone. I'm not telling you he definitely is, but
Right.
I think all the indications, having done this for a while, all the indications are out there that he's probably not going to play again. But we'll see.
Yeah, I'll be surprised.
They can make a run too. I mean, this is a team. As we sort of wrap this thing up in a second, like they could win a series. It wouldn't stun me if they did that, and that gives John Collins 2 more weeks to come back. So that's why they're not closing the door. I think personally, if they knew the season was going to be over in a week, then they would have closed the door already. But they know that they are capable of winning a series or getting deeper into a series. And if you give John 2 more weeks, maybe he's back by then. We'll see.
Yeah, and I mean, assuming that we're right, and John probably doesn't play again, Jalen gives them the talent in the offensive transition that JC normally gives them.
Yep.
Jalen is also kind of a pretty instinctive rebounder and just has more athleticism to kind of use in that area. So I do think there are some areas where Jalen can help for some short stretches where he's put on the floor at the right time, depending on who the other team has on the floor at the time. So I do hope this, in the process, we see Jalen helping for kind of short stretches. I know Nate manages young guys with a pretty short leash almost all the time, so we'll see. But I would like to see when the Hawks maybe get a little bogged down in the half-court offense, that might be a time to put Jalen out there and see if his ability to kind of run the floor and help in transition can kind of get you some easy buckets. But I think that has to be at least part of the thought process for how you work through this Collins absence, is some thought to when you might be able to put Jalen on the floor safely and leverage his strengths. I think that has to be part of the formula, even if it's something that you only go to as a secondary or tertiary plan.
Yeah, I think in particular, maybe getting him ready to play against Washington and Houston down the stretch would be a good idea, just because, putting them out there in Toronto on Tuesday may be a challenge. Toronto is a very well-coached team. That's an interesting team. That's a road game in a tough environment. And Miami's sort of the same thing. Those are the last 4 games, by the way. Tuesday in Toronto, then Washington at home on a back-to-back, then at Miami on Friday, and then at Houston in the finale on Sunday. Most projection systems are thinking 2-2 is the most likely outcome. That's probably the case. They'll be underdogs in Toronto and Miami, barring some. Doesn't mean they can't win. They obviously can win those games, but they will not be picked to win those games probably in the market. And then Washington at home is a back-to-back. That's a game that they should win, but it's still a back-to-back with some travel and customs and all that stuff coming back from Toronto. And then Houston is not very good, but that's the finale, so we'll see what happens there. I think they're more likely to be 3-1 than 1-3, if that makes sense. I think 2-2 is probably the right projection, but 3-1 is closer than 1-3 is. They can go 4-0. This is a Hawks team, as we've seen. They can beat anybody when they play well. I wonder what you think about this. I think the Toronto game is one that I am more skeptical of than the Miami game. I think Miami's not playing all that well. And Toronto scares me more than Miami does at the moment. I know in the standings, Miami's the number 1 seed, but I think the Hawks actually match up better with Miami than Toronto. I could be wrong about that, but I wonder what you think about those 2 games.
Yeah, I mean, Toronto has won, I think, 11 of 14, as the Hawks have kind of won 10 of 13. And Toronto's definitely hitting their stride right now. I think Toronto throws so much switching at you that when the Hawks have struggled in the half-court offense, that's what has been the issue. Like Boston, last time they played, Boston in the second half just used their, really high-functioning switching scheme to really, make it tough on the Hawks offense. Toronto can't do that. Toronto plays a lot of younger guys, so they don't execute at nearly the same level Boston does from a consistency standpoint. But they're so athletic and so long. Like OG didn't play the last time the Hawks faced him, and that was a really big deal. If they have OG and Siakam and Scotty Barnes, it can kind of mix in some constructive minutes from Precious and
Thad Young now.
They got Thad Young kind of mixed in there too. That's some really switchable lineups. I still think in the big picture, Toronto doesn't have enough shot making to say threaten maybe a series significantly. I'm not going to say they can't win one, depending on who that matchup is. But that's what I see in Toronto is if the Hawks allow that switching defense to frustrate them and they are kind of baited into a lot of isolation attack, that's going to be a really hard game to win in a tough environment. During kind of a tough week where there's a lot of pressure. So I see that being more challenging than Miami too. On the Miami side, I never know kind of what Spo is trying to build his team up toward for the postseason, and I think. When you kind of look at what their journey has been this year, rest is going to be probably the priority. There's not a necessarily no-brainer first-round matchup that anyone is seeking out, apart from if you can duck, Brooklyn. But even then, how do you project who's going to get the 7th seed coming out of the 7-8 play?
You can't. I'm sure people keep assuming that Brooklyn will be the 7 seed because Brooklyn will be the favorite in the play-in, which is probably the case. But as we just saw, Brooklyn just lost to Atlanta in a potential play-in preview. They could lose to anybody. It's a one-game season. And that's the thing about Hawks fans asking me earlier today. Do you think it would be better for the Hawks to be the 8th seed to play Miami instead of Milwaukee? And I'm like, well, look, I would prefer to play Miami than Milwaukee. But when it comes to the play-in, you just got to get out of the play-in, man. Go win. What you want to have happen is you want to be the 7th seed going in, so you can have 2 home games. Because you might have a bad night. I mean, if Trey shoots 4 for 22 in the first play-in game, you're in trouble. And that's why you don't want to be in the 9-10 game because, look, anybody, as good as Trey is, if he goes out and has a bad night in the 9-10 play-in matchup, your season's over. And that's the margin. That's why it's so good to be in the top 6. That's why Nate kept talking about top 6 probably longer than anybody thought that was actually a possibility because they know the play-in there's just variance, man. That's the thing.
Yeah, and regardless, finishing 7-8, even if we set home court benefit aside, gives you the simple math tells you you've got twice as much likelihood of getting into the playoffs because you got 2 shots to win 1 game as opposed to 1. So it's that's just it's kind of silly to think about lining that up. To your point, you just got to get yourself in. Hope you get not the worst matchup for yourself and get
not
some sort of
Milwaukee,
reasonable matchup.
Please no Milwaukee if I'm the Hawks.
Yeah, for sure. So it's funny because you're causing me to think. I'm working on right now, like I'm still working on who do I think is going to come out of the East. So what do I think that looks like? That'll certainly come down to kind of how they end up seeding and what order they're in and things like that. But I'm struggling with that. But when I put it down and say, okay, I'll come back to this tomorrow, work on it again tomorrow, Milwaukee still just jumps out at you, among that group, and that's probably where I'll end up. As much as I respect what Boston is doing right now, Milwaukee's just has the ability to throw things at you that really no one else can. So I agree. Like that's not the one you want to draw, but you're not going to go, lose the 7-8 game to try to line that up for yourself.
There's no pit. Once you're locked into the play-in, which the Hawks probably will be in the next couple of days. I mean, it's still possible as we speak. And by the way, we're recording this Sunday afternoon. If you want a little bit of a playoff look ahead, play-in, etc., Toronto plays Miami today. If you want to watch some Eastern Conference basketball, that's a 7:00 game. If you're listening to this on Sunday, and then also Charlotte plays Miami on Tuesday. So those are pretty. Miami has a lot of relevant games for the Hawks, both against the Hawks and involving Hawks opponents in the next few days. But I mean, just get in the field. That's what I'm sure Nate will be preaching. If you're in the 7-8, and I think the Hawks, if I had to guess as of now, will probably be in the 7-8. I would not have said that a few days and weeks ago, but now they look to be in a good position. Doesn't mean there's anything assured. I think if you go 3-1, you're pretty much locked in to being in the 7-8. But if you go 2-2, you open the door up to get past and all that fun stuff. So we'll get into that as we go here. But if you take care of business, you're in good position. And honestly, if it was to be Hawks Cavs in the 7-8, I think you're probably favored in that game, given the way the Cleveland is playing and their roster right now. Not to be too optimistic and look too far ahead, but I think Cleveland is not the Cleveland that was the case 3 months ago.
Yeah, I mean, Hawks fans probably to a person have PTSD around imagining Kevin Love having a 7 for 9 shooting performance from the 3-point line and just winning the game on that. But
just any Cavs playoff series is going to send some longtime Hawks fans into a tizzy. I covered a couple of those. They were not a lot of fun. So
yeah. I remember watching the sweep series that was so heartbreaking from Brazil. I was working down in Brazil at the time, and I feel like sometimes when I put on Hawks Cavs that I look around like, am I back in Brazil? Because a lot of these feelings are kind of surfacing for me.
There you go. Well, Glenn, thank you for all the time. I appreciate that, and you saved me here on this Sunday as I kind of was trying to live tweet Saturday. I was the psycho on press row at the Final Four watching a regular season NBA game on my iPad because the Hawks were playing a big one. So I was trying to help everybody. I was sure it was beautiful mind stuff, but you got a closer eye than I did, and I encourage people to read what you wrote as well last night, as well as your tweets and all that fun stuff. Anything else that you want to plug? Feel free. If you're watching on YouTube, you can already see Glenn's Twitter handle on the screen. But if you're not watching on YouTube, he can tell you where to find it.
Yeah, at Willis_Glenn. I try to put technical content out, as most people know. I also try to have a little bit of fun, so sense of humor and stuff too. But I think most people who follow me because I do try to kind of break video down from kind of a coaching perspective and a technical standpoint, things like that. And you can find a good bit of my work at Peachtree Hoops. That's anything I write that is published kind of goes there, and still very much enjoy being a part of that team that Brad helped cultivate and grow and nurture for a number of years. Still a great group of guys to kind of, even if we're just talking about the game in Slack, during the game, it's a lot of fun stuff, the fun group. So yeah, at Willis_Glenn on Twitter. Follow the group's work at Peachtree Hoops. And on Twitter, I'm not one to ignore people that hit me up with random. I like talking. So even if we disagree, I enjoy kind of a disagreeable conversation as long as it's kept polite and stuff. So I mean, if you have interest, kind of find me on Twitter at Willis_Glenn or follow our work at Peachtree Hoops. Yeah,
I would definitely recommend following Glenn for all of those reasons. Also, I should plug the podcast that you are regularly on with our friend Kevin Chouinard. Hi, Kevin. No, it's a great show. I'm a listener as much as Kevin and I are arch rivals. I sit next to Kevin all the time at Hawks games, but that's a great show if you want another Hawks listening option. ATL 29 with Glenn and Kevin regularly being on there that's a good listen as well. So check that out. Please follow Glenn. Thank you very much, sir, for joining me. I'm sure we'll be back in the near future when I can beg you to come on. As for everybody else, please subscribe to this show on YouTube and Spotify and Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, read Peachtree Hoops, read me if you like to, and all those places that I write, Dime, etc. And we'll see you later on this week.